Hi, I'm John Nunn, and in this video I'm going to talk about a book which was recently published by Gambit publications called Desert Island Chess Puzzle Omnibus. And this book has an interesting history. Gambit originally decided to produce a series of electronic only puzzle books, that's to say in Kindle or app format, and 4 different authors agreed to contribute to this series: Wesley So, Michael Adams, Burgess and myself. And we were all given fairly open-ended instructions to choose 100 puzzles which people are very unlikely to have seen before, and the majority of them shouldn't be too difficult. Well, the 4 authors tackled this task in quite different ways. Wesley So chose all his positions from his own games, which is reasonable enough. After all, he is a world-class grandmaster. Mickey chose a mixture of his own games and other people's. I chose a mixture of my own games and endgame studies, and Graham chose positions from his opening research. So there's quite a variety of positions in this book, with, I have to say, a varying degree of difficulty. Mickey's turned out to be the simplest and Wesley's the most difficult, and the 4 books therefore cover quite a wide range of difficulty. Anyhow, after these 4 books have been published electronically, we decided to put them all together and produce an omnibus edition with all 4 combined in one, that is to say 400 puzzles, and to produce a print version as well as the electronic versions. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the contents of this book, and to be fair to the authors, I'm going to go through one position by each author. So first of all, let's have a look at the position I chose from Mickey's collection. This is quite an interesting position. Obviously, white has a very strong attack. The black king is very badly placed, stuck in the corner on b8 and blocking in the rook. But nevertheless, white still has to finish black off. And as the text says, in the game white played queen d7 and in fact went on to win. But that wasn't the best continuation. How could he have won much more quickly? And I'll give you an opportunity to pause the video at this point so you can work out the solution for yourself. Right, so I'm going to click on the answer link now, and we can see how white could have forced a quick mate. First of all, he gives a check with the rook. Black has to take it, and then the queen moves back along the g file and gives a check along the diagonal. And because the bishop and the queen are operating on parallel diagonals, there's actually nothing black can do apart from put his queen in the way on one or other square, and then it's mate. So really the combination was only 2 moves deep, but it was a little tricky to see because of the retreating move by the queen. The move white played in the game, playing his queen near the black king, looked more natural. But black's vulnerability along this diagonal leading from h2 to b8 meant that the rook sacrifice and then the diagonal check was the quickest way to finish the game. Well, that wasn't too difficult, so let's go on to the next position. By the way, I'm using Gambit Publications app, Chess Studio, to show you these positions. So there's the position. It's from one of my own games. And the question that's being asked here is that white played here rook takes g5. Let's play this move. Was this a blunder or the quickest way to win? Okay, here's the moment to pause the video and think a bit about the position for yourself. So I hope you found the solution. Let's go to the answer. It was the quickest way to win. Let's see what happens. White is now 3 pawns up, and if black simply pushes the pawn, like this, white comes up with his king, paralysing the black rook and well, black will have to give up his pawn on e2 sooner or later, and then white wins very easily with his extra material. But there's apparently a flaw in what white played, because black can sacrifice his rook and then push the pawn. And at first it looks as if white has no way to prevent the pawn promoting, especially as the pawn promotes with check. So there's no possibility of, say, a skewer along the e-file. But nevertheless, white can win by sacrificing his own rook, a counter-sacrifice. Black takes because his king and pawn are fought, and then white clears the square f2 for his king with gain of tempo by giving a pawn check. If black takes the pawn, then white just comes up and stops the black pawn promoting and then wins with his passed pawns on c4 and g4. So the only remaining try for black is to bring his king up to support the pawn. White brings his own king up. Black threatens now to play his king to d2, but white blockades the enemy pawn with his king, and once again the 3 extra pawns will be decisive. This is a trick that's sometimes called the Lohmann trick, after a player, Lohmann, beat Emanuel Lasker in a simultaneous display using it. And it's one of those endgame tricks that doesn't occur very often, although it arises in endgame studies from time to time, but when it does occur it can be extremely effective. Let's go now to a position from Graham Burgess's part of the book. This is a little bit more difficult, and when I solved this position it took me quite a few minutes puzzling over it before I managed to find the winning line for white. White certainly looks to have a good position here. He's got a space advantage and pressure along the G file, but nevertheless, as so often, finding the way to actually force the win is not so straightforward. So take a moment to think about this. It's quite a beautiful win by white, and I hope you can find it for yourself. So let's click on the link and see what happens. White actually played Queen e2 in the game, which was not the strongest move. Instead, he had a forced win with a spectacular continuation. First, he sacrifices one bishop. The bishop is skewering the black queen and rook, so black really doesn't have any choice but to take the bishop, otherwise he loses material. And now the other bishop jumps into the attack, and it's an unusual idea. The rook on g8 is now triply attacked by the bishop and both the white rooks. Indeed, white's actually threatening mate in 2. Rook takes g8, rook takes g8 and rook takes g8. So black really has no choice but to move the rook. But where can it move along the g file? In most places it's just captured. Black of course can't take the bishop because white mates in 1. If he takes on g2, white recaptures with the queen, threatening mate on g7 and with a queen sacrifice on g8, so that's also a forced mate. If he plays his rook to g4, that comes to very much the same thing, with the multiple threats of mate along the g file proving decisive. So, well, he can play bishop g5, it's a bit of a poor move, but in that case white just takes the pawn on e6, and now black's rook, black's knight, black's bishop, they're all hanging, not to mention the pawn on d5, and black is going to face a catastrophic loss of material. I think this is one of those positions where when you know there is a tactic in the position, it's very much easier to find a solution. In the game, of course, Fedorov didn't know there was something in the position, so it's understandable that he overlooked what was quite a tricky win, even though effectively it was only 2 to 3 moves deep. But it was a very neat combination and an unusual idea of trapping the black rook on his own first rank. So finally, we go to a position I've chosen from Wesley's selection, one of his own games. When it's an endgame, material is equal. Position's fine for white, it's white to play. But at the moment his bishop is under attack, and he also has to be careful because the black rook is also menacing the knight on c4. So what's the best way white can deal with this threat to his minor pieces? Okay, this is the most difficult of the four positions, and indeed both players overlook the winning continuation during the game. So you should take a bit of time to think about this and see if you can find the unusual winning idea for white. Right, let's click on answer and see what happens. Well, in the game, white made a mistake and fell into a bad position very quickly. White decided to counterattack the black bishop on a8, but now he ran into some difficulties. Black moved his bishop so that now there's a double attack against the knight on c4, and the bishop is still threatened. The continuation was check, king goes back, and to avoid losing a piece, white went here, but now black won 2 pieces for a rook and went on to win the game. So that was not good. It is possible for white to just move his bishop out of the line of attack, which maintains a more or less equal position. But white did in fact have a winning possibility here, and that's rather unexpectedly to give up the bishop. And at first this doesn't seem like a particularly deep idea because white's attacking the black bishop. So you would say, well, okay, black takes white bishop, white takes black bishop, fine, nothing special. But actually that's not the idea. Black can limp on a pawn down now by playing his bishop to c6, and white then checks and swaps bishops, and the knight hops out. White has an extra pawn, and thanks to the 2 connected pass pawns on the queen side, the material advantage should be sufficient to win. But the critical continuation, of course, is what happens if black takes the offered bishop. So let's see. And the idea is not to take the bishop on a8. If he does so, black takes on b2, and now black has a massive advantage, because if the king moves, white loses the pawn on h2. If the rook interposes, then white's in serious trouble because his knight's completely out of play on the corner of the board, and also the kingside pawns are vulnerable to attack by black's knight. So while the knight is coming back into the game, black is almost certain, well, he is certain in fact, to win at least a pawn. For example, after knight here, pawn here, knight here, and then knight checks on e4, and one of the kingside pawns is going to go. So at first it seems that white's counterattack against the bishop means that his first move wasn't right. But now comes the key point. The knight doesn't take the bishop, it gives a check. If the king now goes to e8, there's an immediate fork, knight d6 check, forking the king and the rook. So not king e8, only other legal move is king f8. White now checks with his rook, black only has one legal move, and now comes the sacrifice, the second sacrifice I should say, and the knight comes back with a fork and captures the rook. Once again, there should be a win. White has a pawn up and has 2 connected pass pawns on the queen side, and in addition, since his pawns on the king side are all on dark squares, they are not vulnerable to attack by the black bishop. So white just has to consolidate and then starts edging his queenside pawns forward, and that should be a pretty comfortable win for white. So that was again quite an interesting idea, because although knight takes b6 looked as if it might be an idea because of the attack on the black bishop, that was just a red herring. And it wasn't the attack on the black bishop that was the key thing, but the fact that white could launch a kind of direct attack on the black king, which would lead to the regain of the sacrifice piece, plus an extra pawn. Well, that gives you a good sample of the positions in the Desert Island puzzle omnibus. As I say, some of the positions, or indeed the majority, are not too difficult, but some are more tricky. So there's quite a wide range of positions to tackle. And I certainly found a lot of them entertaining, and there were a huge number of positions I just hadn't seen before, which is always nice when you have a puzzle book. And believe me, I've seen lots of puzzles. Okay, well, thank you for watching this video, and look forward to seeing you for my next Gambit Publications chess video.